Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second part of the day, and we have another eminent resource person here, Dr. Anik Nandi. I would like to introduce him to you. Dr. Nandi holds a PhD in Languages and Intercultural Studies, which he completed in 2016 as a recipient of the prestigious James Watt Fellowship at the Heriot Watt University, Edinburgh. He specializes in interdisciplinary approaches to study language, language policy, and literacy practices in multilingual societies. Dr. Nandi is currently working as a senior research associate at the Royal Galician Academy of Languages, Spain. Prior to this, he worked as Arts and Humanities Research Council's research fellow at the Queen's University, Belfast, Northern Ireland. In addition to his current role in the Galician Academy, Dr. Nandi is also a research collaborator at the Research Center affiliated to the UNESCO Chair on World Language Heritage at Bilbao, Spain. He is the Associate Fellow of the United Kingdom Higher Education Academy and an active member of the British Association of Applied Linguistics. Very warm welcome, Dr. Nandi, and you can start your presentation.
Thank you, Swati. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the organizers and to the IIT Roper. Thank you for inviting me as well. And I remember that in 2018, I visited the campus and it was a very nice experience. Although this time it would be more virtually, but I will look forward to visit again IIT Roper. It would be a good, nice interaction. So to begin with, researching language governance on the ground, and well, I will talk more about the situation of minority languages, and I will also see that how to study home language transmission ethnographically in this era of social distancing. So so like in the very beginning, we can think about that. That's currently in this pandemic-ridden world. The preservation of cultural and linguistic diversity is a major concern for policymakers, for activists of linguistic human rights, for parents, for educators, and also for different governments and scientists. This, under the effect of globalization, the pressure on dominant languages, on minority languages is relentless. Partly because many speakers of smaller languages find more opportunities if they shift to a dominant one. Despite these pressures, it's interesting to see that how minority language speakers, to varying degrees, maintain or reclaim their languages as active agents through everyday interactions, through the transmission of language within their home domain. So the principal aims of this presentation will be to understand the dynamics of minority language speaking families and their grassroots level language practices in the home and in the community to either maintain or revive the minority language. The endeavor is also to offer a methodological heuristic to understand these dynamics, and I will be exploring these through the lens of language policy. So whenever we talk about anything related to policy, quite a few words that comes into our mind. It should be something like a governmental documents, in some way the government is involved. Well, to begin with, obviously these are true, and it has to do something with a macro perspective of language policy. But in my research, I will go for a broader perspective of language policy. So in this understanding, language policy in a broad sense can be understood as any decision or choice made about languages by certain actors, such as the state, the community, or an individual. So policy in certain ways is there everywhere each time we take a decision regarding or with related to language. So language policy as a discipline and a brief history we could think about. It started as a section of applied linguistic studies, and then language policy only emerged as an independent academic discipline immediately after the Second World War, when after the Second World War, there was like a range of post-colonial nations also emerged, So early language policy scholarship, which we call as a neoclassical era in language policy research between 1950 and to 90, that centered mostly on resolving the language conflicts. And that's a term that has been used quite often in the literature of these newly emerging post-colonial nations such as India, Africa, to developing macro level frameworks for language policy. How to manage different languages in a context where there's like multiple languages are spoken. So later researchers influenced by the canons of critical theory such as Althusser, Gramsci, Foucault, Bourdieu started questioning these macro level frameworks for mainly for two reasons, basically. First, ignoring the role of human agency. Human agency, by human agency, I refer to a range of actors, human actors, such as within the policy sector, if we see it, like the policy makers themselves, and then we have the politicians who are handling these ideological perspectives, and at the same time, we have the people who are really the policies made for a group of people, like us, all of us. So it's the teachers, parents, and also the students themselves for whom the policy is made, and also these people whom I call as human agency, and their role was not reflected in this neoclassical research of language policy. So these researchers, policy researchers, they started criticizing these macro level perspectives. And another fact that really came into mind, that how these macro level language policy frameworks were actually neglecting the socio-political context in which the languages are planned. So doing justice to the title, we try to understand that how language governmentality is linked to socio-linguistic inequity. So governmentality in its primary sense can be understood as art of governance. In Foucauldian use of the term, it can be described as an attempt to shape the human conduct by calculated means through different disciplinary apparatus. So I will explain a little bit later how these disciplinary apparatus work in the context of language. So governmental policymakers tend to endorse the interest of the dominant social group more often, and then marginalize minority languages in society, and thus perpetuate systems of socio-linguistic inequity. Take it for example that in a multilingual or in a bilingual society, because I also worked in India and in Spain and also in the UK context. So you can see that every policy tries to protect in some ways these dominant languages. For example, until 2019, 2020 July, where we have this new education policy in place in India. Before that, the language policy in India was a 3-language formula, where in the name of the mother tongue, the minority language speakers were only receiving, or minority language speaking children were receiving mainly the dominant or the regional language in each context. So we can see that how these policies have been like marginalizing minority languages. So policymakers generally employ a range of policy devices, which you can call as apparatus as well, such as public administration, education, religion, mass media, to govern people's linguistic practices. So each of these contexts sometimes determine or add a value to the language we're talking about, the minority language, whether this language should be used in this context or not, or things like that. So for example, let's take it the Spanish example, whether in the Franco regime, for example, when speaking minority languages such as Galician or any minority language apart from Spanish was prohibited. So like if any students speak that language, then they got beaten up or something like that. And I remember that when I was doing my field work back in India, in Orissa, and that point of time, I met a teacher who was talking to me that he will beat the tribal language speaking students until they start speaking Oriya, and which was a vehicular language in the class. So we can see that these educational policies often serve as a key instrument for manipulating and imposing language behaviors as every child must attend school. So top-down ideologies in education are often visible through the medium of instruction, through curriculum and through the textbooks and other teaching learning related materials. So if we talk about the bottom-up languages, because the previous policy that we are talking about, this government and other factors, they're mostly top-down approach. So if we see that obviously these policies are made for a group of people, like for all of us, like for those people who will act on those policies. So it involves grassroots level actors that I have already mentioned, like parents, teachers, students, and other members of the civil society for whom these policies are designed. They also play a very important role in the interpretation and implementation of this policy on the ground. So these actors, if they are disillusioned with the governmental policies, may create their own language agenda and resist on the ground. And we call these kind of policies grassroots level policies that can be done. They are known as bottom-up language policies. So they may resist, we can think about this, because this formulation of own language agenda may take place in different contexts. It could be within the family, where a family speak its home language, which happens to be maybe, you can take it like the case of a Telugu-speaking family living in the UK, speaking Telugu at home, and then when they go outside, they speak English. Or you can see the similar situations, people in West Bengal, which is my own state, coming from Gujarat or from other states of West Bengal, other states of India. They also speak their own home language in the family, while outside there are other languages spoken at the same time. And inside the classroom also, that could be a context, because sometimes, although the policymakers create the policies in paper, sometimes they don't have an access what is happening in micro context, such as in the context of a classroom. So where, for example, the class should be given in English, but sometimes the teacher shifts in Bengali or Hindi. So these kind of practices that also in certain ways are part of their individual language practices. Or it can also take place at a community level. For example, sometimes within the community or minority language speaking community, people meet up and they speak their language, they organize events on this. So these are the factors that could occur. I will just discuss this with more details later in my presentations through case studies. So how do we understand the language governance inside the family? So family language policy in this context, family language decisions, they generally refer to these overt decisions and choices made by the parents about language inside the family, and certain implicit processes that legitimize certain linguistic practices over others in the home. For example, I remember that in a context where this Hindi-speaking family, they have this dinner table policy that no one will speak in a different language than Hindi. So it's like, because they are Hindi speaking and they have this rule that when we are having dinner, we will only converse in Hindi. So these kind of policies, these are certain choices made by the family, parents, and like the adult family members. They generally often take these decisions and they try to impose it in certain ways to their children so that they could keep speaking that language in that context. So these this certain processes of legitimizing use of the home language. So language governance inside the home is often reproduced through parental agency, as I have mentioned, and sometimes it can be broadened, and you can see that there are also apart from parents, we also have adult family members. They sometimes also take an important role, and various control mechanisms they put in use. These parents, they are also a part of this language governance in this way. So as principal caregivers, parents often adopt the role of linguistic custodians of their children's everyday language conduct, perceiving this ownership as a putative parental right. So here, this is one of these forthcoming models that I'm working on, and this is like the intersection between parental agency and external factors influencing family language policy. We can see that there are 4 main contexts that generally influences these language choices. It includes the socio-linguistic context, the socio-cultural context, socio-political context, and socio-economic context, because you need to have these access to different type of language teaching courses and things like that in that context. So also another factor is very important is language socialization aspect. And then we go further down and we can see that there are different kind of parental perspectives, such as like parental knowledge of bilingualism, language of parents, and then language parental background, and the home literacy environment, which is a bit slide down here. So you may not see it in this model in this presentation this way. So three things are very important within policy context, whether it is a family language policy, whether it is a bottom-up policy, or it is a top-down policy. So policy can be divided in three groups, of like three main components. They are language ideologies, language management, and language practices. So language ideologies are the base of any policy. It means that what kind of value system you are applying to certain language. Yeah, so that is a part of the language ideology. And then we can see that language management, which is more of a planning aspect. So by language management, we refer to that what parents think that they should do in the context of family, I would say they should do. And then finally, that's really causes the intervention in certain ways, parental intervention and language practices is the ultimate result, the final result, what they actually do. So sometimes you will see that in a context that parents want certain things and they try to do certain things, but the end result is always not the same. So these are the factors that are more interestingly, we need to see that how can be researched, because this is, as you can see, that this whole central part is sometimes outside policymakers' reach as such, because sometimes these are the things that are done subtly informally inside the home in a very familiar context. So apart from these three main factors that I have already discussed here, there are other factors such as families' access to different kinds of capitals, Buddhisian form, and then we have social network of the family, then we have certain expectations from parents, and different kind of family language policy models. So how can you see the family language policy models? Because it's a very common model we can find in middle class bilingual parents. For example, if a family is a bilingual, for example, the mom speaks a language or the father speaks another language, sometimes, obviously, there is a very quick route is speaking in English. But apart from this, when it comes to the children, sometimes parents take the decision to speak maybe the parental language, the father's language to the, for example, a Spanish-speaking father and a French-speaking mom, if they maintain a one parent, one language policy in that context, inside the family domain, the Spanish-speaking father only communicates in Spanish with the kid and the mom speaks only French. So these kind of different kind of models. Another important factor is the language input that the child receives. In that context, like it could be most of the time they're speaking one language and the other language is getting a little bit like separated from that language practice. So these are the factors they need to be understood. So I see language policy from a perspective of like a metaphorical onion. So the onion has got different layers, and you need to slice that onion in the middle to understand these different layers and what is influencing what perspective. So my research, to center it on more this topic, I investigate mainly the complex association between the governmental policies and how these policies are interpreted, implemented, negotiated by a diverse range of social actors that includes, I have already mentioned, in everyday context, opening up ideological spaces for use or non-use of certain languages in multilingual societies. So the research questions for this particular presentation, I would like to look at that, whether the parents do create a kind of strategies for language maintenance inside the family domain in a geographical context where one or more dominant languages are the linguistic custodians. If the answer is yes, so what kind of strategies do they individually or collectively develop to contest the linguistic governance of dominant languages? So what are the factors that are responsible for the success or failure of these strategies? So why using ethnographic research in language policy? In policy research, obviously quantitative studies has been done for years and is more of a macro level perspective. You get a broader perspective whether this policy is impacting well or not, whether people are happy with it or not, things like that. But at the same time, qualitative ethnographic research tools such as observation, interviews, and focus groups will allow us to understand the everyday situated practices like everyday context. For example, inside the family, what they are speaking, or in the class, how the classroom interaction is going on, whether the teacher is only implying the dominant language and not giving space for the minority language, things like that can only be understood how through this ethnographic research procedure. So we know a detailed, more detailed perspective towards this. So how these language choices interact with government policies is also another perspective to know, because when you know this human behavioral kind of research through interviews. So currently, the COVID situation, what really makes us think, all of us who are working on social sciences issues and mostly on human behavior things, because of these social distancing protocols now in place, ethnographic data collection process has become more complicated, because you maintain a certain kind of distance, so you are not always present in the context. So sometimes these researchers' absence obviously may deprive us, the researchers, from the direct engagement and the background information. So I thought that can like there are different other researchers in this field as well. We think that maybe this participatory research can offer a solution to this emerging problem at present. So what is participatory research? It is considered as a good practice, ethically correct, by embracing the observations and interpretation of the participants themselves, whose lives are being affected by an intervention or result of the research. So we are talking about involving the research participants to observe their own practices. So it has got a long trajectory at the same time, I must say, because obviously in the context of family language policy or in the family's domain, it has got a long trajectory in this sense, because since the 1920s, for example, the bilingual, the researchers of bilingualism, they mainly maintained this kind of perspective when they started recording their own children's language development and how their language input and practices are going on inside the home. So this has got a long trajectory behind it. So what I did in my own research, apart from using my own like the interviews and focus group, I wanted to consolidate the interview data through parents' self-reported language practices through observation checklists and various self-recorded audio footages in informal interactions in the family. So the first part of it was like kind of a checklist. When previously interviewed parents, they were I sent them some checklists to inform kind of a linguistic daily routine. So like what type of the quantity of different language inputs the children receive, the children receive in daily interactions. And also these interactions are further validated by 2 to 4, like 10 to 12 minute audio recordings of informal caregiver and child sibling interactions. These audios, I ask them to record it in different contexts, sometimes in a dinner table conversation, or I ask them to record it some when they are talking about some homework or things like that, where there is this specific communication with more of a contextual use of the language. So these also offer us kind of an enriched understanding of home language practices on the ground, and how this is done I will show in my presentation. So the first case study obviously is in Galicia, Spain, where I conducted my doctoral research, and the Galician is the minority language here. And I must admit the acknowledgement that it was partially supported by European Union cost action. So my research in Galicia, I stayed in Galicia between 2008 to 12. I learned the language, and I also had a TV program in the Galician national TV. I will just put a small clip so that you can understand. This TV program really helped me to receive a more grounded experience in the society. So it's like it's more related to it's like how I experienced, how I met people over there, and how I saw the society and culture, and how I received the input about more of this way of seeing perspective in Galicia. So obviously, then afterwards, I was more involved each time with the language, and I was a part of their minority language activism also, and I received some media exposure. Some of these pictures are here. You can see that my own PhD research took place between 2012 to 15. So I'll just slightly put you this one. So I will just show you that how this TV program I used to go and visit different places.
Empieza una viaje por una das zonas máis salvaxes e máis bonitas da Costa da Morte. A Costa de Camariñas é ben coñecida polas súas paisaxes totalmente naturais. Berni, un veciño, prometeu levarme a lugares que só coñece a xente da zona. Este é o faro Cabo Vilán e hoxe temos a oportunidade de subir a parte máis alta deste faro. Ahora vamos a subir a torre.
So the whole interest behind this was to understand that how people communicate, what their ideologies are regarding the language, their language attitudes, and it really gave me a good base, I would say, in the society. So when we talk about multilingualism in Spain, there are loads of languages are also spoken in the Spanish context. So the Galician is this language where I worked, and there are other languages along with Spanish that with Castilian Spanish that is spoken in Spain that involves, you can see that there is a hierarchy where Spanish is on the top, and there are co-official languages such as Galician, Basque, Catalan, and Valencian, and Aranese. And then we have the recognized languages such as Asturian, Aragonese, and various indigenous but unofficial languages and their varieties that involves several languages again. The Cantabrian, Extremadurian, and Fala, also Portuguese spoken in Spain. Romani is a gypsy language spoken in Spain. It doesn't have a specific territory. It's spoken almost everywhere in Spain, wherever the community resides. And then we have the sign languages and different varieties of Spanish as well. And finally, at the bottom of the power structure, we have these immigrant languages that involve Arabic, Punjabi, Bengali, Chinese, Russian, Bulgarian, Ukrainian, and different European, other Eastern European languages as well, and French and other due to this European Union migration. So when I center into the Galician context, I will just more focus on how the Galician context is. So in this context, we can say that the Galician, along with Spanish, is a co-official language of this autonomous region. Approximately 3 million people speak that language in this context. Around 41% of the Galician population speak only Galician as their L1. And then we have around 31% of the population that speak Spanish as their L1. And we have 25% that were brought up speaking both the languages. So how this socio-linguistic milieu of Galicia is working. In Galicia, the interaction between the social and symbolic capital manifests through the intangible prestige offered to the Castilian, which happens to the main official language. So always Spanish is on the top, although numerically a minority in this sense, if we see that. So this last 30 years of language policy in Galicia remain mostly anodyne, which we call as a non-interventionist approach, which favored more of a non-interventionist model of language policy with a minimum implementation on the ground. So it's like a kind of a low-intensity model of language policy. So low-intensity models are generally quite common in many societies, as Fishman, one of our main scholars in language context in sociolinguistics said once, there is no such thing as no language policy. There is always an implicit language policy in place. So like this, these kind of models, low intensity models, are where there is a policy in paper, but no implementation in practice, or very low level of implementation is done on the ground. So this Galician government was mainly they always maintain this perspective. In 2010, they started a new policy, which is like in preschool, this decree ensures, which is called the Decree of Plurilingualism, that the medium of instruction would be the home language of the children. So once again, we reach in this point of home language in a context where there's like a majority of children in the urban context speak Castilian at home due to this rupture of intergenerational transmission in the previous generation. So it automatically becomes the language of instruction in urban schools. So the percentage of children between 5 to 15 years who never spoke never speak Galician in day-to-day context have increased 17% between 2008 to 13, underscoring an incessant language shift in this context. So obviously, at this point of time, when these results came out, it caused a huge uproar in the society, in the Galician society. So obviously, in this context, the political stakeholders, they come to give their opinion on it, and they very swiftly push the ball to the court of the parents, saying that they're offering sufficient Galician in schools, but it's the parents who don't speak the language. So it's interesting to see that in this point of time, I was doing I started my research. So I was interested in looking at these parents, pro-Galician parents, whether they speak always Galician or not, but pro-Galician mainly parents, whether they are interested in maintaining the language or not, and if they do it, and what kind of strategies they maintain for it. So here I have one of these family profiles, which can see that they are very much like kind of a case study here. For example, Elena and Virgilio. So Elena is a journalist and Virgilio is an engineer. They live in Santiago de Compostela, from where I'm talking right now. So like they have 2 children, and the eldest son is around 9 years old and studies in a primary school in Santiago, whereas their youngest son attends a cooperative funded Galician medium school, which is called Rayola. So small information here, because since the government stopped offering these through their language policy space for Galician, so these parents sometimes they have developed a kind of a cooperative, and they try to fund Galician medium school to maintain their language, reclaiming their language space in one way or the other. We can say that the home language of this couple is Galician. So while come to the children, both parents speak only Galician in their day-to-day life. The children peers generally they speak mostly Spanish, Castilian Spanish. So although the children speak mainly Castilian with their peers, they use Galician at home. So I have got a small audio here. This is how this family language policy and family language audit took place. So you can have some quick link. I know that the Spanish is, Galician is not spoken mostly, but we can just have a quick look at it.
Estou escoitando o que me diste. Estou preguntando, mamá, con quen fuches no autobús?
A la iglesia. ¿No fuiste con Matilde? Matilde por la esquina. Ah, es verdad. Se lo me acordaba.
Matilde esta semana no está.
Ah.
This is a typical dinner table conversation in a Galician speaking home, and now we have a glance of it inside how it was.
Estou escoitando o que me diste.
So what are the strategies that parents took in this context? So obviously, the first point that Virgilio speaks about is the prestige and identity planning at home. Since Bruno is the name of the boy, and started the school, he sometimes tells us that he feels uncomfortable because most of his classmates speak Spanish, and they often make fun of him if he speaks Galician. In such circumstances, we talk to him and tell him that Galician is part of our identity, which he shouldn't renounce. So this kind of counseling that the parents continuously do with their children, so that they could continue to maintain the language outside the home. So like he knows that the Galician is our home language, but we frequently chat with him about this linguistic coexistence in Galicia. So there's a lot of counseling going on continuously at home with the child to make him to understand that we should live with these languages, with both languages. There is a different kind of a reality, and they also live through this. So so that he doesn't shift or leave Galician altogether. So that is the main perspective behind this strategy. And the strategy, as I have already mentioned before, creating Galician medium school through cooperative funding and creating associations, as you can see in these two schools where I did my research. Another very interesting thing that the parents sometimes try to govern the children's linguistic ecology, or like their language environment in certain ways. So it's like, for example, Elena talks about that they have got a WhatsApp group. I'm not saying whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's how they did it. So it's like, so Elena says that they have got a WhatsApp group which created, is called Tribe, the Tribe, because in Galician they call it Tribo. So this group was created in 2013-14 because immediately after this whole data that came out, and these parents, they try to meet because they send their kids to Galician medium schools, and then they try to meet to play together so that their children shouldn't feel ridiculed by other kids or Spanish-speaking kids. So in that context, they talk about that how the friends outside home who normally speaks in Spanish, most probably the Galician-speaking children will shift to Spanish if there is a peer influence. So they made a WhatsApp group so their friends and they could just meet up and speak in Galician after the school hours as well. So what are the concluding remarks here? Because these through these kind of research methods, participatory part, we got to know more about that how Castilian works inside the home domain. So Castilian still remains, I understand that retains a greater degree of symbolic value in the urban Galician society, creating certain fluctuations and inconsistencies in desired language practices in Galician-speaking homes, whether they want the kids to speak a language and they end up speaking a different language, which is in certain ways the hegemonic language in this context. In a community such as Galicia, where there is an existence of Orthodox native speakers, strings palpably due to this language shift, pro-Galician parents can sometimes occupy a very important role, as this study shows that in the process of language revitalization from the ground, creating bottom-up family language policies that I have already mentioned. However, it still remains to be ascertained whether these parents can restore the process of intergenerational transmission of Galician in the home domain and within the community. Another important thing that I also noticed that these parents sometimes reach at a point where they at least get that their kids speak that language at home, but when these kids grow older, sometimes due to peer pressure, they shift to the dominant language. So another case study is interesting from my postdoctoral research in Northern Ireland in the UK, where it's like we always sometimes see that UK is obviously English dominant, but apart from English, there are other various languages are spoken in the UK context. It's in the last data, census data, around 600 different languages are spoken in the UK context. So there is also a kind of a hierarchy. So we can see that English is always on the top, and then you have the minority languages recognized in their individual areas, and sometimes some languages, they are not really area-based. For example, Welsh in the Welsh context, then we have the Scottish Gaelic in Scotland, and we have the BSL, which is the British Sign Language, which is doesn't have any specific space, but is used all over UK. And then we have the different grade is Irish Gaelic in Northern Ireland and Scots in Scotland. And then we have other minority languages such as Manx, Cornish, Ulster Scots, and then we have languages of established and economically stable immigrant communities, which are like long established communities such as Chinese, Polish, Urdu, Arabic. These are mainly the speakers who are coming from some of these from pre-colonial era. They are already stable there. And also we have the case of Hindi in Punjabi in the context of, and Gujarati as well, in the same context. And then we have the other refugee and migrant newcomer languages such as Somali, Vietnamese, Sorani, etc. So this is more or less the context where we are going to center now. although my research will take, I will show you that how it works in the Northern Irish context with more contextual research. So in 2019, there's a very interesting thing going on. You can see just before Boris Johnson comes to power, and he talks about more of the dominant ideology that is there for language governance, the top-down area. So it's like he says very clearly that there are parts of our country and parts of London still, and other cities as well, where English is not spoken by some people as their first language, and that needs to be changed. So this kind of perspective is very top-down, as you can see that there is an interest of like you leave your own home language, you just come to English and try to change that language. So how the situation is in Northern Ireland? Well, Northern Irish context is unique in several ways. I will discuss this throughout my presentation. Indians and Chinese can be considered as the longest established ethnic minorities in Northern Ireland since 1950s. And transnational migration slowed down during the Troubles. You possibly know from for a long time, like for around 30 years, there was like lots of activities in this Northern Irish context, and there was fight between the Protestant and the Catholic community, and that caused, in some ways, the migration slowed down. But after, when in 1998, the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and the peace came to these territories. So I was based in Belfast, so my research mostly took place in these surrounding areas. And we can see that in current, because it's very interesting to see that how between 2000, after 1998 till 2004, there is a huge increase. And when once various European countries were included, Eastern European countries were included inside this European Union referendum, and then finally several people from Eastern European countries came to Northern Ireland, and they worked in various areas. So it also increased the linguistic diversity within Northern Ireland, which was mainly English dominant, or some groups were Irish were speaking also in that same context. So currently there are around like 15,000 immigrant people who are studying in the Northern Irish school system, and they speak around 90 different languages. So the diversity is there, and it is also stated that there is a huge increase between 2004 to 12, 72% increase between this immigrant student group. So the language legislations, which is more of a top-down policy in place in Northern Ireland, that includes the Belfast or the Good Friday Agreement, and there is no official language policy in Northern Ireland. So Irish medium education enjoys some protection from the government because it's a part of this Good Friday Agreement. So teaching learning of heritage languages often takes place outside mainstream schooling in the context of migration, as you can see that through supplementary schools. And supplementary schools are often supported by grassroots level community organizations, such as Indian Community Center in the context of Northern Ireland was also organizing certain schools, such as speaking Malayalam speaking schools on Sundays, or maybe some classes of Hindi were also organized, and Punjabi as well. So these kind of things, and through charities and particular religious groupings on a voluntary basis. For example, Chinese group used to organize a kind of a Saturday school, and Polish group are also organizing a Saturday school, which is called this weekend schools. It may be on Saturday, it may be on Sunday, depending on the availability, always in a fluctuating mode. So these are the groups there. They are continuously trying to organize these heritage schools to maintain these languages, and often they don't receive a governmental support, sometimes through some charities or something, but not always available for this. So when I was doing my research, one of my interests was to include storytelling as a process of data collection to understand and to promote diversity and inclusion in schools. So I contacted different storytellers from like the professional storytellers, and I was also working as a storyteller with them. I was speaking stories, I was telling stories in Hindi and Bengali, at the same time. So, like they were speaking mostly in English and in other languages, in Spanish. Some of them used to speak Arabic. For example, this person, his name is Sef, and he was talking about in Arabic as well. So the way we wanted to introduce these languages is like to give a bit of a space to these minority language speakers in the school domain so that they could share their own experience. And obviously, it really has a very good and positive impact. So I can talk about these more in the questionnaire session. So I will just focus on how the parental perspective was there. So how the negotiation takes place in the parental, in the home domain. So here we have two case studies. One is from Joël and Constance. These parents, they have two kids at present. They go to a primary school where I conducted my research. And Joël is a Catalan Spanish speaker. So she speaks both Catalan and Spanish and English. And Constance is a French speaker, and she speaks also Spanish and English. So they are working now as biology teachers and were ex-employees of Queen's University as postdoctoral researcher, like I did that point of time. So when we discussed about this, and this very interesting point, because they maintain this one parent, one language policy that I mentioned before. So Joël generally speaks either in Spanish or in Catalan with the kid, with both the children, and the mom speaks mostly French. I'll see a little bit in a few minutes how it works. So, so obviously, when the children, especially their elder child, when he started the school, he was not speaking English, or he was not speaking English at all. So after the end of the first year, which we technically call it as a silent period, so obviously in a meeting with the principal recommended the parents to speak to him only in English. So just the phrase as he mentions it, just forget about Spanish and French and just speak to him only in English all the time. Interestingly, in that same school, French is offered as a foreign language, is taught as a foreign language. So interestingly, although it is taught as a foreign language, but it's not really, the home language, French, is not valued at the same time, as you can see. So obviously, I was surprised to see that how did they react to it. So the mom says that, no, we didn't do it because they really didn't bother to do it because they have the power, they have the cultural capital to know that the importance of languages, and these languages are also dominant languages in their own countries. Apart from maintaining the roots, they also give them a kind of a additive bilingual perspective in the host society. So in this context, Joël also further mentions that I know it was wrong, it was very wrong. So you will see that here how these home languages are used in this context.
Après, on fera les pictures.
D'accord. Maintenant, le deuxième. Il faut d'abord highlight the capital letters. C'est lesquels?
Là.
Mhm.
Là.
Mhm.
Ça. Pourquoi il y a deux O?
Je sais pas.
Quelle est la dehors?
Non, il faut que tu cherches les petites lettres en fait.
Quoi?
This is a very typical conversation during homework. So the mom and the child, both of them are communicating, sometimes mixing between these two languages. And there I have very interesting case study from a Tamil-speaking father and a Malayalam-speaking mom, and their home language was already, because being in India, because this person, this Ashwin, is a person who worked as a postdoctoral researcher at Queen's, and obviously I had a chance to communicate with them several times, and we met up and we organized some tea or coffee. He came, so like his daughter came later when he joined Queen's, and his daughter was already 7 years old. And interestingly, even back home in India, their home language, the family's main language was like one person, one language. Obviously, the father speaks mostly Tamil to his daughter, and the mom speaks Malayalam. But between them, they generally communicate in English. So English was also present for for their daughter. So interestingly, two things happened. The first is very important, what I just put here. in this context is like that the Ashwin is very clearly was very upset with the situation when he started talking about it in a focus group. He says that the children here are not here, I mean, in the Northern Irish context, in his experience, they are not exposed to a colored child. So when they saw her, they found that she's different. So her food habits were different. We ate with hands. So obviously food habits are different. And then we can see that Jigyasha is the mom. She was saying that we packed her lunch and she used to take the lunch and go. And with the smell of Indian food, it smells different. So they started teasing her. Yeah, it was tough for us. So in this context, I should also add another anecdote in a different familiar conversation. She once shared with me that her daughter was also ridiculed because of her English, because it's more from a racial linguistic perspective. We can see that how accent in English can also can develop a kind of a separation. So these are also there in this context. So obviously you can see that how Hashwins try to normalize the situation and says that now it's fine, she is getting used to. So always we have this question, what is she getting used to? Is she getting used to this kind of treatment, or she's trying to move on and trying to adapt a different personality and erasing her own cultural identity, which is obviously will never be possible due to the skin color in the context. So,
D'accord. Maintenant le deuxième.
Sorry. So I will just put this a small how this mom and the daughter how they are communicating. Obviously, I'm not a speaker of Malayalam, so I will ask our colleague Swati if she could just explain what is said here. Maybe the sound is not very clear. First, I will play it in any case, and then I would ask Swati if you could just kindly explain it.
Cookies, we made. Yeah. So like basically one biscuit. Biscuit in the middle ice cream. Ice cream in the middle Harry. Okay. That's Harry and Lucas started. Okay. Around the Harry was a good master.
Swati, are you there? Could you please explain us?
Yeah. What I could make out is that she is telling the difference between a biscuit and a cookie, and
Okay.
she says that a cookie is nothing but a biscuit with some icing on the top, and someone is allergic to it, is what I have understood.
Well, thank you very much. Frankly speaking, I really appreciate this because I'm still working on this new data I have, and thank you very much for explaining me. And that's also, I really appreciate that. So I'll go further. The findings, obviously, is very in the preliminary findings. The paper that I have co-written with my colleague in Queen's University will be out in a few days. From those who are interested, it will be published in Current Issues in Language Planning. So immigrant languages are often seen as a problematic barriers in the context of English-dominated setting of UK and in the Northern Ireland more specifically. Particularly, you can say that the language acquisition of English is important, and the very first place, obviously, it is important because it's the language of the whole society. And but the policymakers and the teachers often see these home languages as a problematic barrier, which is a very common thought, and we have seen this in the broader UK context as well. Similar thoughts have been processed for over the years and the research conducted in this area. So we can see also the acquisition of modern European foreign languages come before these immigrant languages in certain school contexts. For example, French is taught or Spanish is taught is more important than teaching Hindi or Polish, which happen to be also dominant languages in their own countries. Home language maintenance is seen as a responsibility of parents. So school really doesn't want to offer any help on that ground in this Northern Irish context. So heritage language shift, as we have seen in other contexts, and parents always complain through their focus groups that is quite prominent among these immigrant children. Sometimes they shift to English and they don't want to come back and don't want to reinforce their home language practices. A multimodal arbitration between the discourses of power, ideology, languages are played out on a daily basis by various actors in these school contexts, such as the educators, people, the pupils, and the immigrant parents and the students of different grades. We can see that who are implicated in a constantly fluctuating field of agnostic negotiation in these contexts. So thank you very much. I think I met the time. Did I, Swati? Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
Anik, sorry, I was mute. Yes.
Did you hear me, the last part, the findings?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So thank you very much for giving me this space. And there is a very short bibliography. In any case, if somebody needs something more on it, feel free to drop me a line. You have my email as well. So I will put it in the beginning again. So I'm finished. So do you want me to come online or?
Yeah, you are online. Can I flash a few, one or two questions, Anik?
Please go ahead.
This is from Ishani.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ishani, for very interesting questions. It's very difficult to answer in a one word. This, how could the political position or dialect hold in it? What is dialect itself? If we think it in a very proper way, as already linguists have already said several times, that dialect is also actually a language. So language is a dialect itself, if we say it this way, with a governmental power behind it. So obviously, language nationalism and subnationalism is could be a way to resist imposition, but it also depends on the context, because if you are not in a context where you are your language is the national language perspective, so in that context it becomes difficult to organize and resist it that way as you expect. So our national education policy is still new, and its implementation is boasting of giving space to the mother tongue, as it happened with its predecessors, like in case of three-language formula, where we also talked about using mother tongue in the national education policy, even both of including the mother tongue as a medium of instruction till the grade 8, and even if it is possible, it should go further. We need to see how all these things could work in a real life, because it's offering space for languages, but we need to see that how it works finally, because it's still in the very initiation stage and it still needs to implement it in a proper way. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Anik, I'll post another question. This is from Sharmishta.
Okay. Thank you, Sarmishta, for interesting question again. I'll just well, yeah, that should be the ideal world, as you say, that if we could sensitize them. So, well, I can say that since counseling sometimes doesn't make the impact, or it doesn't offer the specific impact that we want to get, that's why when I was doing my research in Northern Ireland, I intended to organize these storytelling events to sensitize them as such, because I also did some questionnaire studies with these children who attended these storytelling sessions, where we intended, because first the storyteller tells a story in English, and then we try to encourage the minority language speaking children to tell a story or the same story in their own language. So, for example, if I'm telling a story in English, and then I'm giving that space to a Hindi or a Malayalam speaking boy to tell the same story. It's a very simple story. To tell the same story in a different language, obviously this impacts in certain ways, this fun activity is impacting in certain ways to their English speaking or Anglophone or maybe bilingual, apart from being English speaking also, child who is there as their colleagues or peers in the school and the classmates. They are also interested in their language and their culture. And what we did actually, we also wrote down certain hello, thank you in different languages, and we tried to use those languages during my field. And afterwards, also, I wanted to encourage them to use it inside and outside the school. So it's very fun thing happened afterwards, like when I did my field work, and then we visit the schools after a later period of time. And we found that some of these kids, they became friends and they started using these terms. For example, a Chinese-speaking boy was very happy to see that somebody is saying hello to him in Chinese, and that he mentioned in one of these later follow-up interviews when he conducted it in the Northern Irish context. So yeah, that's a very important perspective. The counseling is important, and it's also need to include these major language-speaking children to know what their other bilingual friends are speaking. I think I explained it as much as I could. So yeah, please. Thank you very much.
So, Anik, this is from Aniruddha Ladda. Can you see it on your screen? Yeah.
Thank you, Aniruddha. Very nice question again. I must say that should a language be always viewed from the sociolinguistic environment in respect of acquisition of language by a person? Well, as a sociolinguist, I see it. Society is always important, and it should be seen that way as well. Language is not something separated, and at least I see it that way. It shouldn't be seen that in respect of acquisition, sociolinguistic perspectives are very important, obviously. They determine what languages are receiving which value and how they are used. Obviously, at this individual level, acquisition is also more related to how you learn the language and each what process and things like that. If there are any more questions,
yeah. Thank you, Anik. Could you take a few more questions, or
yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah. All right. This is from Vithi.
Well, thank you, Viri. Very nice question. Actually, this is a current topic of research that we are conducting at present because, as you possibly know, I'm based in Spain. And in Spain, there was like a hard lockdown for a long time, since started from March to end of July almost. So it really impacted in certain ways, depending on the minority language context. It depended like how learn from home helped them to understand more about their own languages. Obviously, in this European context, in micro families, we find that there's like parent children, they were like more centered, and both the parents work in the European context in most cases. So what happens that the kids generally, in my own research, in doctoral research, I found that the kids, since the morning, they go to the breakfast club or maybe they have the breakfast and they go to the school, and the parents are maybe working in the afternoon session. So they go to some different activities such as music or maybe some other kind of like physical activities or something like that. So obviously, when the kids come home, the only very little is left for them. So they go directly, like for storytelling or something like that. So reading storybooks or watching TV and go to sleep. So obviously, the TV and other media things, Facebook, whatever, YouTube videos and things like that, are mostly in the dominant languages because that's how the format has been all these years. So what happens that these kids were spending less time, quality time with the parents. So when this whole confinement thing worked and these kids were spending more time with their parents in the Galician context, it definitely impacted their learning of languages. Obviously, if a father is like if they're spending more time, they're giving more use to it. Very interestingly, a few days back, I read an article on this issue in New York Times, where one of these whether the journalist is talking about how this impacted their own home, because she was a German speaker living in the in Los Angeles. And then finally what happens that his son speaks more German nowadays because he uses the language more with the mom. So spending time together helped in certain contexts. Interestingly, in the Basque situation where there is an intergenerational transmission of the languages were a little bit lower, the situation certainly changes, because one of the preoccupations in the recent data that we find post-COVID scenario with the children's language acquisition, we find that it's like they are losing Basque, because Basque was mostly taught through the immersion programs in the schools, because many of these parents, they don't speak the language, but they have got a strong position towards their home language, so they sent their kids to different immersion schools. What happens in these schools, because they offer them the space to speak the language, apart from learning it, they have the space to speak it. But if they don't have the space at home, the language is once again they are coming to the same position that they were before, and the parental preoccupation is seen in the different interviews conducted. So coming back to this whole point was like learn from home trend. Well, it depends on the socio-linguistic and socio-political context where we are in. So it's like, obviously, you can cultivate more multicultural linguistic environment where the parents could involve more languages than school. Obviously, if you speak more languages at home, there is more bilingualism at home than in school. So that can also be banked on, I must say. Thank you.
The next question is from Parijat.
Well, thank you, Parijat. Very nice of you to think about this. Very interestingly, the concept of killer languages is a bit dramatic. We need to see that whether it is, obviously there is an interest in choosing the lingua franca is a kind of a part of a politics where you can see that once again that I mentioned through the language policies, the dominant languages are offered more space. So obviously another factor that comes in this lingua franca perspective is the globalization. In this neoliberal era of globalization, where you can see that how one can bank on their cultural capital through education and learn these languages and try to be. That's why you can see that Indian context, there's more than even Hindi, you will see that there are loads of English medium schools are there because the parents, even I remember in a very familiar context, once a minority language speaking father back in India told me that you learned English, so why do you want me to learn this minority language? So I want my kids to reach the same level. So obviously there is an interest towards more English rather than any other language. Obviously, English was the reason of, due to colonial implications of it, there are some pressure on the community, on the minority languages, but the concept of killer languages, I would still think that it's a little bit dramatic to call a killer language. So yeah, obviously we have been hearing the term of English as a Tyrannosaurus Rex, or all this research that has been conducted by linguistic imposition or imperialism by Robert Philipson. We have also seen Tobes Kudnap-Kangas's perspective towards it. These are the areas that obviously could be seen that way, but yeah, it's the concept of killer language way more dramatic in my own perspective. Thank you.
So the next question is interesting. Let's see if we can answer that.
Well, so India-China border tension is not from today. So teaching learning of Chinese, I don't know how much it is in the school level, but it has been taught in different university levels, and like people always learned Chinese because it gives you more job opportunities alongside English. So also obviously the close connection between India and China. There are some border tensions, but some things are even more in depth, as you can see that they never stop, because there's so many Indian nationals are working at present in China. So it's like there is a need is always there. If you want to go there and you know that you need to leave a like more of a you don't want to like English is not everywhere in China, so you need to know the Mandarin at a level. So it's the teaching learning of Chinese in India shouldn't have an impact on the India-China border tensions. That personally I believe that way. Thank you.
So these are the questions for now. Thank you, Anik. Yeah. So thank you so much on the behalf of all the organizers as well as the participants who are listening to you. I would like to thank you for this inspiring session, and I believe that many would be interested in language research in India. Assuming from the comment session, you should read it, and many are interested and be influenced by your lecture. Thank you, Anik.
Very much. Thank you to
I'll
everyone.
end the broadcast now. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.